Hey everyone, I'm Pion and welcome to Pion's Perspective. Today I'm gonna talk about procedural map generation in competitive multiplayer shooters on the example of Due Process. And you can see some Due Process gameplay in the background. To be more precise, it's pre-alpha prototype footage by Partially Royal. I will put the link to the full video in the description below. And it's kind of fun to watch, so I recommend you check it out after you watch this video, which is about, as I said, procedural map generation. So what is that exactly? Well, usually in a game it means that the maps you play on are not actually handcrafted by a human being and instead are created by a computer algorithm and changes every time you play. So depending on the game, this either means you get a new map every level or every round, every playthrough, or whatever. For Due Process, it means that one match consisting out of 6 rounds, 3 rounds of attack and 3 rounds of defense, will have 6 new maps every time, because you get 1 new map you've never played before every time for every round. So 6 new maps you've never played before for every match in Due Process. Obviously, adding map generation, procedural map generation to your game is a pretty important game design decision, because it has a big impact on the gameplay. But what exactly is this impact? What does it actually affect in the game? Well, let's take a look at single player games first, because those are the ones commonly seen with procedural map generations. Like, especially games like roguelite and roguelite games, you see it's a pretty common feature to have procedural map generation in those. Arguably, there aren't even in those genres if they don't have it. So why is it so common in those games? Well, obviously, because those games are expected to be played over and over and over again, because dying is part of the experience, and thanks to the permadeath mechanics, you have to start from the very beginning every time again. So you play through the first few parts of the game over and over and over and over again, and if that would always be the exact same map, this could potentially, depending on the game again, but potentially become boring pretty quickly. So one good way of tackling that issue is adding procedural map generation, because it creates a new map every time. There's new stuff to explore, new obstacles to overcome. It creates variety and keeps the game fresh. So is this the same for multiplayer games? Well, yes, but there's more to it. If we take a look at a competitive multiplayer shooter like CSGO or Rainbow Six Siege, you play usually the same maps, same few maps over and over and over and over again. And that's the same thing as in a roguelite, right? Well, not exactly, but it's similar. If you would replace those maps with procedural map generation, well, you would get a new map every time, so that would definitely add variety to the game and keep it fresh, and that's a good thing. However, it would do something else, and that is completely changing the skill set required to play those games. And if that's a good or bad thing, well, that depends on your personal preferences, what you like and what you don't. So what exactly do I mean with that? Well, the obvious thing here is that one really important skill is completely gone from the game. One really important skill in every competitive multiplayer shooter and in a lot of other games is map knowledge. Learning the ways on the map, learning it in and out. How do I come from A to B? How can I flank my enemies? What are alternative routes? What's a good spot to place a gadget? Where can I hide? Where's cover? Where do I get a good angle on a certain spot? Stuff like that. And that's a really, really important part of games like, as I said, Rainbow Six Siege or Counter-Strike Go or a lot of other games. And it takes usually a lot of time to learn all that stuff, learn all the maps, learn all the details and stuff like that. And as mentioned before, this skill is completely gone. It's completely unimportant. Not only unimportant, like you cannot learn it for a game like Due Process, where you have procedural map generation, because well, there are no maps to learn. You get a new map every time. You cannot prepare for that. So this skill is completely gone. And as mentioned before, whether this is a good or a bad thing depends on your personal preference. I personally don't like learning maps. I don't find it enjoyable running around a map and looking for good spots or just learning a map. Obviously, you learn some of the map by just playing the game, but to go really in depth, you have to actually spend extra time on it. And I don't have fun doing so. I don't enjoy that. Other people, however, do. So, good example for that is Rainbow Six Siege, the drone videos. There are a lot of people who post videos about cool drone spots they found. So what those people are doing, they are running around the map with a drone and trying to get in certain spots where the enemy will not expect them, like on things in the roof or on some bars and stuff like that, and behind book shelters and stuff like that. All the crazy places the map designers and developers never thought of. And those people usually have a lot of fun doing that. I mean, there's a small chance that some of them only doing it to become better at the game, but I think most of them actually enjoy doing so because, yeah, it wouldn't be that many people who do that excessively if they would not have fun doing so. So people like that really like learning maps. They have fun figuring out all the in and outs and little tricks and details of a map. And for those people, procedural map generation is a pain in the ass because they can't do that. That's really unfun for them. That's really annoying for them because one of the things they like doing and like learning a game is completely absent. It's not important anymore. It's not there anymore. So those people probably prefer games with human created maps. Let's name it that way. Obviously, some people like different games, and they're like one game for reason A and like another game for reason B. But in general, if you prefer or if you have fun learning maps, then having maps is usually a good thing for you. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't, so I actually prefer the procedural map generation over learning maps quite a bit. So one important question comes to mind though. When map knowledge is completely gone from the game, what other skills become more important? Well, one instantly springs to mind, and that is aiming, because it's a first-person shooter, right? If there's no map knowledge, it's all about aim. Well, depends on the game, really. For some games, this is true, especially for pure shooters, which is all about where it is all about shooting, so no gadgets and stuff like that. And especially if it's a Twitch shooter, like let's say Unreal Tournament or Quake or something along those lines, where it's all about the reaction and stuff like that, and the aiming and aim. Obviously, if map knowledge is gone, then aiming is the one big important skill in this game left that you have to master to be good at it. Because before that, if your opponent was a little better at aiming, but you knew the map better, you still had a good chance by just outmaneuvering him. Sure, you can still outmaneuver people on a unknown map or procedurally generated map, but you cannot prepare for it. So the focus is more on the aiming, and that's way more important than everything else in that in that moment. However, for more slow-paced and tactical games, like let's say Rainbow Six Siege or Due Process, that's not quite true because there are a lot of other important factors as well, which impact the game. Like you have to use your gadgets correctly, you have to coordinate with your teammates, you have to do door breaches and stuff like that. And there is a different skill that becomes way more important the moment you add procedural map generation, and I like to call it the general tactical knowledge. What exactly do I mean by that? Let me explain with an example because I think that's easier. So easier to understand. So in Rainbow Six Siege or CSGO, you can go to a guide or watch a video or a stream or whatever and learn a new tactic from that. Like, okay, on this map, in this situation, like let's say Rainbow Six Siege, you on house, you're attacking first round. You can use this tactic. Two people go there, one goes there, one picks that role, and you do a door breach there and stuff like that. And then you go in the game and apply that tactic to your game, and you can be successful without actually understanding why this tactic is good, why it works. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to say that people who are playing Rainbow Six Siege or CSGO don't have good general tactical knowledge, especially because especially on the higher skill end, people definitely have. But you don't actually need it to be, well, somewhat competent at the game. I think you can put a comparison to MOBAs where like the pro gamers, they know which item to buy because they know what is good and what is good in which situation and why it is good and which combination of items work with your hero and stuff like that because they understand the mechanics. But like less good players will just copy those builds, and for the most part it will still work. Back to shooters, that's the same. To use the tactic, you don't need general tactical knowledge. However, to create the tactic or to adapt to an opponent tactic, you actually need that skill quite a bit. So people on a higher skill level will probably still have it, and there will probably be people on the lower skill levels which will have it as well. But it's not necessarily required to play the game at least decent, I would say. So that's a big difference because in a game where you don't have maps to learn, you cannot actually learn tactics either. So you have to come up with a new tactic every time. Like, let's go back to Rainbow Six Siege really quickly. If you go in a game, Rainbow Six Siege, and you're like, let's say you're a super pro team, you're a top-end skill level team in Rainbow Six Siege, and you go in a match, you probably have somewhat of a plan. Okay, we're playing house, we're attacking, we go with strategy 37B because of those reasons. And then you adapt. And then you start, you like, there's a first, like, what's a quote with, like, the plan gets ripped apart when you contact with the enemy. No, that's not the wording, but you get the idea. The moment you meet with the enemy, the first contact with the enemy will change your plan if you're really good, obviously, because then you have to adapt. You have to start to adapt to what the enemy is doing, and you have to process that information and stuff like that. But your starting plan is always the same. Not necessarily always the same, but it's predetermined. You have it like written down before you start the match, basically. At least written down in your head, maybe not on actually paper. But if you're playing due process and you get a new map every time, well, you can't do that. So even your first initial plan has to be created on the fly. And as I mentioned earlier, you need general tactical knowledge to actually do that. You have to understand why is a certain move good in a certain situation, to combine those moves to a specific tactic, fitting your current situation, your map you're getting thrown at, you have to play, and yeah, to the situation you're in, which is every time different. So you have to come up with a new plan every time. And that's really cool in my opinion, because I really like the idea of that, of having this general tactical knowledge. This is a way more interesting skill to learn for me than map knowledge. As I said earlier, though, that's his personal preference. By the way, the video, yeah, it continues. It has a little stutter at that point. I'm not sure why. I noticed that earlier. But now it runs smoothly again. So anyway, as I said, this skill is way more fun for me to learn than map knowledge. And therefore, I really like the idea of having procedural map generation in due process. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so hyped for that game. One of many reasons, too. But yeah, it's one of the big reasons, definitely. So in conclusion, what I actually wanted to say is, like, putting procedural map generation in your game is always an important design decision. But for a multiplayer game, it's even more important than in a single player game. Well, there are probably exceptions in the single player where it's more important for single player games as well, for similar or different reasons. Sorry. But in general, for a multiplayer game, it's way more important because while it also adds variety and keeps the game fresh, it also fundamentally changes how the game is being played. And that's obviously really important to your game design. So either if you're creating a game your own, or if you're looking at a game that actually has procedural map generation and you're thinking if you want to play that game, you have to think about what is the benefit of procedural map generation, and what are the downsides, and does this fit the philosophy of my game? Is that what I want to have in my game? Is that fitting the theme? Is that fitting my goals? Or is it like maybe not so good and not fitting my goals? And I think that's really, really interesting to think about, because like on the first glance, if you think about, should I put procedural map generation in my game or not, like it seems like an easy, like not necessarily an easy answer, but nothing like super complex. Yeah, it depends. Do you want to make your own maps to have good level design, or do you want to have endless variety by having new maps every time? But for a multiplayer shooter, it's actually way deeper than that, because it changes how the game is being played, and that's what I find really interesting about it. So anyway, that's the end of the video. So if you want to watch the full video of the background footage, including in-game voice, obviously, which makes this way more interesting, then go check out the video in a link in the description below. I will probably put it up there, well, higher than this, but on the top of the screen, as well as a card they're called, YouTube cards. And yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'm TH Pion. I always appreciate if people spend their free time watching my content. That's really humbling for me. So as I said, thanks a lot for watching. Have fun and see you next time.